At 9:12 p.m., there was a knock on my door. Not a soft knock. Not a neighbor's knock. Authority. I remember the exact time because I had just glanced at the microwave clock while trying to decide if I had enough energy left to wash one more dish. My children were asleep. The apartment was quiet, and I was holding a borrowed phone in my hand. When I opened the door, 2 police officers were standing there. "Ma'am," one of them said carefully, "we received a report that your children were left alone." For a second, I didn't understand the sentence. Left alone. The words didn't attach to reality. My son was asleep in the bedroom to my left. My daughter was curled under her pink blanket, breathing softly. I had been gone for 3 minutes. 3. And in that moment, standing barefoot on cold tile, I knew exactly who had made that call. What I didn't know yet was how long he had been building toward this. If you've ever had someone look at you calmly and tell you that you're the problem, if you've ever started questioning your own memory because someone else sounded more certain than you felt, stay with me, because that night wasn't about anger. It was about strategy. My name is Danielle Brooks. I'm 35 years old. I'm a professor. I'm a mother of 2. And for a long time I thought I was losing my mind. That knock at 9:12 p.m. only made sense after I understood the pattern. But the pattern didn't start with the police. It started with something that sounded responsible. It started with organization. When I married Marcus, people described him the same way every time. Stable, structured, dependable. He didn't drink. He didn't party. He wasn't loud. Compared to the chaotic relationships I had seen growing up, he felt safe. I was raised by a mother who taught me 2 things at the same time. Love deeply, but never depend blindly. I believed I had done both. I had my doctorate, my own income, my own name on things. Marcus liked to say we were a team, and in the beginning that's exactly what it felt like. The first shift was so subtle I didn't recognize it as a shift. It was framed as help. "You're overwhelmed," he said once, gently taking my laptop from my hands. "Let me handle the finances. I'm better with numbers." It sounded practical. We had 2 small kids. I was teaching full-time. He worked in corporate logistics and loved spreadsheets. He consolidated our accounts, created shared dashboards, changed some passwords for simplicity. He called it streamlining. I called it partnership. For months, I didn't question it. If I asked about a bill, he'd answer immediately. If I asked about savings, he'd give a confident explanation. He always sounded certain. And certainty is seductive, especially when you're exhausted. The first time I felt something tighten in my chest was over groceries. My card declined. It had never declined before. I stood there in line, smiling at the cashier like it was a minor glitch. When I called Marcus, he sounded irritated. "I told you we need to tighten spending. For groceries? You don't see the full picture, Danielle." I remember staring at the produce in my cart. Milk, eggs, cereal, the full picture. I started asking more questions after that. Not aggressively, just curiously. How much is left in savings? What did you move last week? Why did the electric bill say past due? Every question was answered, but every answer carried something else with it. A sigh, a pause, a look. "You're spiraling lately," he told me one night. "You've been really emotional." Emotional? I was tired. But I wasn't irrational. At least, I didn't think I was. Then he started using another word. Unstable. Not directly, not cruelly, just casually. "You've been overwhelmed. You've been snapping. You should maybe talk to someone." At first I agreed. Of course I was overwhelmed. 2 kids, full-time job, bills tightening. But something about the timing bothered me. Every time I questioned money, I was the one who needed help. Every time I asked for transparency, I was not myself. And slowly, almost invisibly, I began second-guessing my own reactions. Was I too stressed? Was I forgetting things? Was I harder to live with than I realized? That's the part people don't talk about. Gaslighting doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like self-doubt. And self-doubt is quiet. By the time the electricity warning came in the mail, bright red letters stamped final notice. I didn't explode. I didn't accuse. I walked into the living room holding the envelope like it was something fragile. Marcus, I said carefully, why is this late? He didn't look up from his laptop. It's handled. It says shut off. It's automated. You're overreacting. Overreacting. That word again. I went to bed that night telling myself I trusted my husband. Telling myself I didn't understand the mechanics of cash flow. Telling myself stress was making me paranoid. What I didn't realize was that while I was shrinking my needs to make room for his certainty, he was expanding something else. And the night the police knocked on my door, that wasn't an accident. It was escalation. But before I tell you what happened in those 3 minutes that changed everything, you need to understand how control doesn't arrive screaming. It arrives organized. Control doesn't announce itself. It doesn't slam doors. It doesn't throw punches. It opens spreadsheets. When Marcus first suggested merging everything into one centralized system, it sounded mature. We're building a future, he said. We should operate like a unit. A unit. I liked the way that sounded. We had just moved into a modest rental townhouse outside the city. 2 kids under 5. Tuition payments, insurance, car notes. Life felt heavy but hopeful. Marcus created color-coded budgeting tabs, savings projections, debt reduction timelines, emergency buffers. He'd sit at the kitchen table explaining it all like a consultant presenting to a client. This is how we get ahead, he'd say, tapping the screen. And I believed him. Because he seemed calm. He never hesitated. He never stumbled over numbers. Confidence can feel like competence. The first password change didn't alarm me. I updated security, he said casually. The second one made me pause. I'll just manage access so we don't accidentally move things. Accidentally move things. I nodded. I was grading papers at midnight, packing lunches at 6 a.m. I didn't want another mental load. He reduced my debit card limit to control impulse spending. I don't impulse spend. But I let it go. Temporary, he said. Temporary is a dangerous word when you don't track time. Weeks passed, then months. Every financial conversation flowed one direction. From him to me, he presented. I listened. If I asked for statements, he summarized them. If I asked to log in, he'd say, I'll send it later. Later rarely came. The first time I pushed back, it wasn't dramatic. I was sitting on the couch, laptop open. I just want to see everything myself, I said. He didn't look up immediately. You don't trust me? The question wasn't loud. It was soft. Disappointed. That's what made it effective. It's not about trust, I said quickly. It's about visibility. He leaned back slowly. You've been anxious lately. There it was again. Anxious. Not wrong. Not excluded. Anxious. You're juggling too much, he continued. I'm trying to reduce your stress. Reduce your stress. He framed restriction as relief. And because I was exhausted, part of me felt guilty for pushing. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was overcomplicating things. Then came the utilities. I found the first overdue notice wedged under a stack of mail he had moved aside. It wasn't addressed to him. It was addressed to both of us. Final notice. I walked into the office where he was working from home. Why is this late? He sighed. You keep focusing on isolated pieces. It says shut off. It's automated. I'm reallocating funds. Reallocating. He used words that sounded intelligent enough to silence fear. But why didn't you tell me? Because you spiral. The word landed harder that time. Spiral. Like I was a loose thread unraveling our stability. I started replaying my recent reactions in my head. Had I been sharp? Had I been impatient? I remembered snapping at our son for spilling juice. I remembered crying in the shower. Maybe I was spiraling. The gaslighting wasn't theatrical. It was cumulative. Every concern I voiced was met with diagnosis. Every question became evidence of instability. One afternoon, I tried logging into the bank again. Access denied. I called him. Did you change something? Security update. Why didn't you tell me? You're making this bigger than it is. Bigger than it is. I stared at the screen long after the call ended. I wasn't asking for new money. I wasn't accusing him of theft. I was asking to see our own accounts. That's when something quiet shifted inside me. Not anger. Awareness. There's a difference between someone managing money and someone managing access. That night, I paid attention to his language. He never said our funds anymore. He said the portfolio. He never said we decided. He said I adjusted. The partnership vocabulary had disappeared, replaced by operational control. A week later, my card declined again, this time at a pharmacy. Our daughter needed antibiotics. The cashier looked at me with polite discomfort. Would you like to try another method? My hands felt cold. I used a credit card I rarely touched, and I sat in my car afterward, staring at the receipt. Marcus called me 10 minutes later. Why did you use that card? For medicine. You're undermining the plan. The plan. Not our child. Not the urgency. The plan. That was the moment clarity flickered. Very faint, but real. This wasn't about numbers. It was about hierarchy. He controlled flow. He controlled information. He controlled narrative. And slowly, invisibly, he was controlling me. But even then, I didn't think he was capable of something malicious. I thought he was rigid. I thought he was overly structured. I thought we just needed communication. I didn't yet see the architecture forming behind the scenes. I didn't yet know that while I was defending our budget, he was funding something I had never agreed to. And when I finally saw where the money was going, the word unstable would take on a completely different meaning. The first time Marcus used the word unstable, he smiled when he said it. Not cruelly. Almost sympathetically. You've just been unstable lately, he told me one evening, folding laundry with deliberate calm. Unstable. I laughed at first. Unstable? I'm tired. You're reactive, he corrected gently. You snap. You question everything. It's not like you. Not like you. That phrase stuck. Because if this wasn't like me, then who was I becoming? Motherhood had rearranged my body. Work had stretched my brain. Sleep deprivation had hollowed my patience. But unstable? That sounded clinical, concerning. And he didn't drop it after that. He layered it. You forgot the pediatric appointment. You cried over a utility bill. You accused me of hiding things. Each moment, isolated, was ordinary. Together, he framed them as evidence. You need support, he said one night, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. Real support. What does that mean? Therapy. Maybe an evaluation. Just to rule things out. Rule things out. I remember staring at the wood grain in the table, trying to slow my breathing. Are you saying there's something wrong with me? I'm saying you haven't been yourself. There it was again. That quiet, disappointed tone, as if he were the reasonable one watching someone unravel. The terrifying part wasn't the accusation. It was how plausible he made it sound. I had been crying more. I had been distracted. I had been anxious about money. But the anxiety had a source, or at least I thought it did. Every time I asked for clarity about finances, he'd tilt his head slightly. You're obsessing. Every time I expressed concern about overdue bills, he'd say, You're catastrophizing. He spoke in therapeutic language. Regulation, projection, emotional dysregulation. Words that sounded informed, authoritative. I started Googling symptoms late at night. Mood disorders, burnout, postpartum residual depression. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was unstable. That's the insidious thing about gaslighting. It doesn't erase reality. It reframes it. And I began reframing myself. One afternoon, I forgot to switch the laundry over. Marcus came home, opened the washer, and sighed loudly. You see? This is what I mean. What do you mean? You're scattered. You start things and don't finish them. I looked at the clock. I had been answering emails while helping our son with homework while cooking dinner. Yes, I forgot the laundry, I said. That's not the point, he replied. But it was. It was always the point. Small mistakes became character flaws. Ordinary fatigue became instability. I started overcompensating, double-checking everything, making lists, setting alarms. I wanted proof that I was competent, that I wasn't deteriorating. But the more I tried to prove stability, the more he seemed to catalog failures. Then he began saying it in front of others. Subtly, Danielle's been overwhelmed lately. She's under a lot of pressure. She's not quite herself. To friends, to his sister, once, even to our pediatrician. I stood there, smiling tightly, while he narrated my mental state like a case study. I felt exposed, but I didn't correct him. Because what if he was right? That's the most dangerous phase. When you start asking yourself if your perception is reliable. One night, after another conversation about money, I raised my voice. Not screaming, just firm. I deserve access to our accounts. He went quiet. Then he leaned back in his chair. There it is. What? That edge. That volatility. Volatility. Like I was a stock chart. Spiking unpredictably. You're proving my point, he added softly. That sentence echoed in my head long after he left the room. You're proving my point. If I reacted, I confirmed instability. If I stayed silent, I confirmed passivity. There was no correct response. Only containment. That's when I realized something subtle, but critical. He wasn't trying to understand me. He was building a narrative. And narratives are powerful, because once someone is labeled unstable, everything they say becomes suspect. Every boundary becomes hysteria. Every demand becomes evidence. I started paying attention to timing. Every time I questioned money, the word unstable resurfaced. Every time I asked for transparency, he suggested I needed help. Not once did he suggest we needed help. It was always me. I began journaling quietly. Dates, conversations, phrases, not because I planned to leave, but because I needed an anchor. Something that proved I wasn't imagining patterns. And as I reread my own notes one evening, something crystallized. There was a rhythm. Question, diagnosis, boundary, character attack, concern, psychological label. This wasn't random. It was strategic, but I still hadn't seen the full picture, because while I was defending my sanity, he was protecting something else. And the first real crack in his story wouldn't come from an argument. It would come from a receipt. The receipt appeared on a Wednesday. I wasn't looking for it. I was cleaning the office desk because I needed something physical to organize. Something I could control. Marcus had printed a document and left the paper tray slightly open. A thin strip of thermal paper was caught beneath it. I pulled it out absent-mindedly. It wasn't groceries. It wasn't utilities. It wasn't anything that aligned with tightening. It was a boutique purchase. $1,842.17. I stared at the date. The same week my card declined at the pharmacy. The same week we had received the final electric notice. My pulse didn't spike immediately. It slowed. I walked into the living room where Marcus was scrolling through his phone. "What's this?" I asked, holding up the receipt. He barely glanced at it. "A business expense." "For what business?" "You don't understand the structure." There it was again. The structure. "It says boutique," I pressed. "It's client-facing. Client-facing." He didn't hesitate, didn't blink, just reclassified it with authority. "You're reading isolated data points again," he added calmly. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. Isolated. Obsessing. Spiraling. I almost handed the receipt back and apologized. Almost. But something held. "Then show me," I said quietly. "Show you what?" "The full picture." He exhaled slowly. "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" "You don't trust me." It was always that. Not transparency. Trust. If I asked for evidence, I was accusing. If I asked for clarity, I was unstable. That night, my bank login stopped working entirely. Not partial access. Not limited view. Gone. I texted him from the kitchen. "Did you remove my access?" "Security update." That wasn't the question. "I'm protecting us." Protecting us. He said it like I was the threat. The next morning, my debit card declined again. This time at a gas station. The pump stopped mid-fill. Embarrassment burned up my neck as cars lined up behind me. I paid with a credit card. When I got home, he was waiting. "Why did you override the spending limit?" "For gas." "You're sabotaging the budget." "Sabotaging." I stared at him. "You restricted the card." "For discipline." "Discipline." That word landed differently. "You're punishing me." He laughed lightly. "See? Emotional." There it was again. Not defense. Diagnosis. That's when I began noticing the pattern. Every time I questioned something, something else tightened. Card limits reduced. Internet speed throttled. Shared streaming account removed from my devices. It wasn't explosive. It was incremental. Adjustments. Micro-restrictions. I stopped reacting immediately, not because I accepted it, because I was watching. I opened a private email account. I began saving screenshots, documenting declined transactions, photographing mail before he could move it. The more I observed, the more I saw the architecture. He wasn't reacting impulsively. He was calibrating. One evening, I confronted him again. There are transactions I don't recognize. He closed his laptop slowly. You're hyper-focusing. That's not an answer. Danielle, this fixation isn't healthy. Fixation. The language shifted slightly each time, from unstable to anxious, from anxious to obsessive, from obsessive to unhealthy. He wasn't just dismissing me, he was reframing my credibility. And then came the comment that changed everything. If this keeps escalating, he said casually, we might need documentation. Documentation. What does that mean? I asked. Just to protect the kids. The kids. The implication hit like ice water. He wasn't just building a financial wall. He was laying groundwork. If I pushed too hard, I would be labeled volatile. If I demanded transparency, I would be recorded as erratic. I suddenly understood something that terrified me more than the missing money. He wasn't afraid of being exposed. He was preparing for conflict. And I was still thinking we were in a misunderstanding. That night, after he went to bed, I searched our shared cloud account. Folders had been renamed. Files relocated. Access permissions modified. He had quietly consolidated everything under his credentials. The partnership was gone. I stood in the dark office staring at the screen. This wasn't about being better with numbers. This was about power. Power over flow. Power over narrative. Power over me. And I realized something else. The boutique receipt wasn't the real problem. It was proof of liquidity. There was money. Enough for nearly $2,000 at a luxury store. But not enough for gas? Not enough for antibiotics? Not enough to keep the electricity from being flagged? The math wasn't broken. The priority was. I didn't know yet who the purchase was for. I didn't know yet where the money was actually going. But I knew this. He wasn't protecting us. He was protecting something else. And whatever it was worth more to him than my stability. The next punishment came faster. And it didn't involve money. It involved our children. The first time I noticed him using the kids, it was so subtle I almost missed it. We were sitting at dinner. Our son was pushing peas around his plate. Our daughter was humming softly, lining up her fork and spoon in perfect symmetry. Marcus leaned back in his chair. You know, he said casually, looking at our son. Mommy's been really stressed lately, so we have to be extra calm around her. The sentence was wrapped in softness, but it wasn't gentle. It was positioning. I looked up immediately. I'm right here, I said evenly. I know, he replied, smiling. I'm just helping them understand. Understand what? That I was fragile? Unstable? I didn't challenge him at the table. Not in front of them. Later that night I brought it up. Don't narrate me like that to them. Like what? Like I'm some unpredictable force. He shook his head slowly. You're projecting. Projecting. The language had evolved. Now I wasn't unstable. I was distorting. A week later, my son repeated something that made my stomach drop. Daddy says you get confused about money. I froze. Confused how? He shrugged. Like you forget stuff. Forget stuff. I didn't forget bills. I didn't forget payments. I didn't forget responsibilities. I forgot to move laundry. I forgot to switch off lights sometimes. Normal human lapses. But in Marcus's version of me, they were patterns. I started paying closer attention. He would frame things carefully. Mommy gets overwhelmed. Mommy worries too much. Mommy needs quiet time. None of those statements were false in isolation. But repetition creates identity, and identity shapes allegiance. One evening, he casually mentioned possibly moving. Maybe we should relocate somewhere quieter, he said, glancing at me. It might help. Help who? I asked. You. The implication was surgical. Our environment wasn't the problem. I was. That's when I understood something terrifying. He wasn't just restricting finances. He was repositioning himself as the stable parent, the calm one, the reasonable one, and me, the emotional variable. The night it crystallized happened on a Saturday. Our daughter needed a therapy appointment across town. Marcus insisted on driving. Halfway there, he turned down a street I didn't recognize. "Where are we going?" "I have to stop somewhere quickly." He parked outside a modern office building. "Stay in the car," he said. "I'll be 5 minutes." 5 minutes turned into 20. Our daughter started getting restless. Our son asked why we weren't moving. I called Marcus. No answer. When he finally returned, I asked what that was about. "Paperwork," he said. "For what?" "You're spiraling again." There it was. The shield, the redirection. Later that evening, I checked our shared calendar. There was a new entry. Family consultation. Scheduled 2 weeks from now. I hadn't agreed to that. I hadn't been asked. I confronted him calmly. "What is this appointment?" "It's preventative." "Preventative for what?" He looked at me like I had just proven something. "You see? That intensity. Intensity." I felt something inside me go very still. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was documentation. He was assembling context. Meetings. Language. Narrative. He was positioning himself for a future argument. And in that future, I would be the unstable one. I began noticing how he described me in text messages. When he wrote to his sister, he'd say, "She's been struggling." When he wrote to a mutual friend, "She's under a lot of pressure. I'm worried." Worried, concerned, protective. All the language of a supportive husband. None of the language of a man controlling access, restricting funds, or quietly moving money. That was the genius of it. His aggression was administrative, not emotional. One night after the kids were asleep, I said something that shifted the energy completely. "If you ever try to use my mental health against me," I said quietly, "that's the end." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just smiled faintly. "I would never do that," he said. And in that moment, I knew. Because the only people who say "I would never" that quickly are already thinking about it. The next morning, I found something else missing. Not money. Not access. Time. He had rearranged the children's after-school pickup schedule without telling me. "My workload shifted," he said. I adjusted. Adjusted. There was that word again. He was adjusting everything. Access. Language. Perception. And now, routine. That's when the fear changed shape. It wasn't about being broke. It wasn't about being mislabeled. It was about losing position in my own children's lives. And once that fear settled in, I stopped arguing. I started preparing. Because if he was building a case, I was going to build one too. But the next move he made wasn't subtle. It wasn't administrative. It was humiliating. And it happened the night I decided to leave. I didn't leave in a dramatic way. There was no screaming match, no shattered glass, no suitcase thrown down the stairs. I left quietly. Because by then I understood something about Marcus. He escalated when cornered. So I didn't corner him. I waited until a Tuesday afternoon, when he was at work, and I called the property manager of the small condo I still owned from before we upgraded. It had been rented out for years. "I need it back," I said. My voice sounded steady. It didn't feel steady. When I told Marcus I wanted a separation, he didn't explode. He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands like he was reviewing a contract. "You're making a mistake," he said calmly. "I'm making a boundary." He smiled faintly. There it is again. Again. As if this was part of a pattern of irrational impulses. "I can't live like this," I said. "Like what?" "Without access. Without transparency. Without respect." "You're emotional," he replied. I felt something inside me detach. "I'm leaving." That's when the tone shifted. "If you walk out," he said quietly, "you destabilize the kids." Destabilize. He loved that word. "I'm not walking out on them. You're choosing chaos." The implication was clear. If I left, I was the unstable one. If I stayed, I endured. He refused to leave the house. "I'm not uprooting the children because you're overwhelmed," he said. So I uprooted myself. When the tenants moved out of the condo 2 weeks later, I packed what I could. He stood in the doorway while I sorted things. "You can take what you need," he said. It sounded generous. It wasn't. The furniture we had bought together, too expensive to move. The newer couch, Doesn't fit your space. The washer and dryer? Installed. What he handed me instead were the older pieces, the ones we had planned to replace. The chipped coffee table, the mattress from the guest room, 2 mismatched lamps. When I asked about the children's toys, he disappeared into their room and came back with a trash bag. Inside were broken action figures, puzzles missing pieces, stuffed animals with loose stitching. This is half, he said. Half. I stared at the bag. Where are the rest? They need stability. Stability. I swallowed. The first night in the condo felt colder than it should have. Not temperature. Atmosphere. The space echoed. The walls were bare. The mattress lay directly on the floor because I hadn't brought the frame. I tucked the kids in with thin blankets and told them it was an adventure. Our son asked, "Are we poor now?" The question cut deeper than any insult Marcus had ever thrown at me. "No," I said firmly. "We're building something new." But when the lights flickered that night, I panicked, because I didn't know which bills were paid, and I no longer had access to confirm. I called Marcus. It rang twice before he answered. "What? The electricity here. Do you know if it's active? You should have checked before you moved." I didn't control the accounts. Silence. Then, "You're on your own now." The words were soft. Not loud. Not cruel. Just final. On your own. That night, I sat on the kitchen floor after the kids fell asleep. The condo smelled faintly like dust and old carpet. My phone battery was at 8%. I hadn't unpacked the charger. And for the first time since all of this started, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of it. I had a doctorate. I had a career. I had savings once. And yet I felt reduced. Stripped. Humiliated. He hadn't hit me. He hadn't screamed. He had simply given me the leftovers. The older furniture. The broken toys. The diminished access. Material humiliation is quiet. It doesn't bruise skin. It bruises dignity. The next morning, I went back to the house to retrieve the last of my clothes. Marcus opened the door halfway. "You forgot something," he said, handing me a stack of folded sheets. They were damp, smelled faintly of mildew. "These were under the mattress you took," he added. I knew they hadn't been. But arguing would only feed the narrative. I took them. As I walked back to my car, I realized something chilling. This wasn't anger. This was calibration. He was adjusting my comfort downward, reducing my environment, lowering my baseline, so that survival felt like gratitude. And as I drove away, I made a decision. If he was going to reduce me to scraps, I was going to document every scrap, because humiliation only works in silence, and I was done being silent. I didn't know yet how far he was willing to go. I didn't know yet that the next move would involve something more dangerous than money or furniture. It would involve accusation. And it would come faster than I expected. The night my phone broke, I remember thinking, Of course it would happen now. I had just finished putting the kids to bed. The condo was still half unpacked. Boxes lined the hallway like obstacles I didn't have the energy to clear. I was on the phone with my mother, trying to sound steadier than I felt. "I'm okay," I kept saying. "It's just transition. Transition." That was the polite word for collapse. While I was talking, the phone slipped from my hand. It hit the tile face down. The screen didn't shatter, but when I picked it up, it wouldn't respond. I pressed the power button. Nothing. I restarted it. Black. I felt a wave of panic that surprised me with its intensity. I didn't have a landline. I didn't have close friends nearby, and the only person who had an extra phone within 10 minutes of me was Marcus. I stared at the broken screen for a full minute before deciding. I locked the condo door. The kids were asleep. Deep sleep. I would be gone 3 minutes. 5 at most. I drove to the house. The porch light was on. I rang the doorbell once. No answer. Twice. Nothing. I could see the glow of the television through the window. He was home. I knocked harder. Finally, the door opened halfway. He didn't look surprised. "What do you want?" "My phone broke," I said. "I just need an old one. I'll put my SIM in it. I need to call Mom back so she doesn't worry." He stared at me like I had asked for something unreasonable. "You're not serious." "It's just a device. You're dramatic." "Dramatic." I'll bring it back tomorrow, I said. No, just no. Marcus, it's late. I just need to let her know I'm okay. You're on your own now. The second time he said it. On your own. I stood there, stunned by how small the request had been, and how deliberately he refused it. Why are you doing this? I asked quietly. He stepped back and began closing the door. You chose this. The door clicked shut. For a moment I stood there, staring at my reflection in the dark glass. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't accused him. I had asked for a phone, and somehow I had been framed as unreasonable. I drove back toward the condo, heart racing harder than it should have. Halfway there, I spotted a woman walking her dog. I rolled down the window. I'm so sorry, I said, embarrassed. Could I borrow your phone for 1 minute? Mine just broke. I need to call my mom. She hesitated for a second, then handed it to me. I dialed quickly. Mom, it's me. My phone died. I'm okay. I just didn't want you to worry. I hung up, thanked the stranger, drove home. The entire errand had taken maybe 7 minutes. I had barely locked the condo door when there was a knock. Not soft, not neighborly. Authority. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. 2 officers stood outside. Ma'am, one of them said, measured and neutral. We received a report that your children were left unattended. Left unattended. The phrase hit like cold water. They're asleep, I said immediately. I stepped out for a few minutes because my phone broke. Who is their father? The officer asked. I didn't hesitate. He knows they're with me. I didn't say he called. I didn't need to. The officer glanced at his partner. May we see them? I nodded. I walked them to the bedroom. My son was curled up, breathing evenly. My daughter clutched her stuffed rabbit. The officers softened immediately. One of them stepped back into the hallway. Ma'am, he said quietly. How long were you gone? Less than 10 minutes. He nodded slowly. Is everything okay here? The question lingered. Not accusatory. Observant. And in that moment, something snapped into place inside me. This wasn't coincidence. This was escalation. He had refused a phone. Waited. Called. Framed it as negligence. And hoped the system would respond in a way that supported his narrative. Unstable mother. Irresponsible. Emotional. Volatile. The officers left without issue. No warning. No report filed against me. Just a quiet note and a measured look that said more than words. When the door closed behind them, I leaned against it and let the realization settle fully. He had used the police as punctuation, a period at the end of a sentence he had been writing for months. You're unstable. You're dramatic. You're unsafe. Except now, I had witnesses. The next morning I received a message from his brother. You need help. Look what you did. Attached was a photo. Marcus's arm scratched, angled dramatically, the implication clear. I stared at the image, confused. When? How? Had I touched him? Had I brushed past him in the doorway? I replayed the entire night in my head. Every movement, every word. And for one terrifying second, I questioned myself. Did I black out? Did I grab him? Was I more unstable than I thought? That's how deep the gaslighting had gone. It took me a full minute to anchor back into memory. No, I hadn't touched him. I hadn't raised my voice. I had asked for a phone. And he had built an accusation. That was the moment clarity became solid. This wasn't about anger. It wasn't about miscommunication. It was about leverage. And if he was willing to involve police and fabricate injury, then this was no longer emotional warfare. It was strategic, which meant my response couldn't be reactive. It had to be structured, and the first thing I did the next morning was call an attorney. The photo spread faster than I expected. Not publicly at first, privately, strategically. Marcus didn't post it himself. He didn't need to. His brother did. Captioned with something vague enough to avoid direct accusation, but clear enough to plant doubt. Some people need help before they hurt someone. I stared at my phone for a long time. My name wasn't written, but I was tagged. Subtle. Calculated. The comments were split. Some confused. Some sympathetic. None asking me directly what happened. Because when a narrative is framed carefully, people don't investigate. They absorb. My first instinct wasn't anger. It was shame. I imagined neighbors seeing it, colleagues stumbling across it, parents at my children's school whispering, "Unstable." That word didn't need to be written. It had already been rehearsed. I considered responding, typing out a detailed explanation. But then I realized something critical. Defensiveness looks like instability. Silence looks suspicious. There was no winning in public. So I went private. I called the attorney whose number I had saved that morning. Her name was Rebecca Lang. Her voice was steady, professional. She didn't interrupt when I explained everything, from the finances to the police visit to the photo. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she asked one question. Has he ever hit you? No. Has he ever threatened you physically? No. Has he ever restricted access to money or accounts? Yes. Has he suggested you're mentally unstable to others? Yes. She exhaled softly. This is coercive control. The term settled over me like a spotlight. Not unstable. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Coercive control. It escalates when the controlled partner leaves, she continued, especially if the controlling partner believes reputation is leverage. Reputation is leverage. That sentence explained everything. He didn't need to destroy me financially. He needed to weaken my credibility. If people believed I was unstable, then every future conflict would tilt in his favor. Custody discussions, asset division, even social circles. What should I do? I asked. Document everything, she said. Every declined transaction, every message, every post, and stop engaging directly unless necessary. I had already begun documenting, but now it had purpose. That night, I created folders, screenshots of texts where he referenced my instability, copies of overdue notices that contradicted his claims of structure, photos of the boutique receipt, screenshots of the social media post. I stopped responding emotionally. When he texted, "You're making this worse," I replied, "Please communicate through email regarding the children." When he wrote, "You're spiraling again," I didn't respond. Silence is powerful when it's intentional. 2 days later, I received an email from him. Subject line, concern. Inside, he wrote, "I am worried about Danielle's mental state. I believe the children need stability. I am documenting incidents." He CC'd his sister. I forwarded it directly to Rebecca. Within an hour, she responded, "Good." He just confirmed narrative construction. Narrative construction. He wasn't venting, he was building. I began noticing how careful he was in writing, never overtly aggressive, always concerned, always rational. He signed emails. With care. Care. The word almost made me laugh. The escalation didn't stop. He contacted the children's school counselor, asked if they had noticed behavioral changes. He requested copies of attendance logs, asked about my pickup times, administrative aggression, paper trails, documentation. If I reacted emotionally to any of it, it would validate his storyline. So I didn't. I kept everything. I responded minimally. I gathered bank records directly from the institution using formal requests. And that's when the larger crack appeared. There were transfers, regular ones, not business expenses, not household payments, personal transfers to an account under a name I didn't recognize. Small at first, then larger, then consistent. The boutique receipt wasn't random. It was part of a pattern. Money hadn't disappeared. It had been redirected. And while I was being framed as unstable, he had been funding something carefully. The realization didn't make me cry. It didn't make me scream. It made me cold. Because now I understood the full architecture. Financial restriction, psychological labeling, public narrative, institutional involvement, all layered, all deliberate. He wasn't panicking. He was repositioning. But so was I. The difference. He thought I was reacting. He didn't realize I was restructuring. And when the mediation date was set, he walked in confident, certain, still believing the unstable narrative would hold. He didn't know I had already mapped the system. And I had receipts. Mediation was scheduled for a Thursday morning, 2 weeks away, 14 days. I used every single one of them. Not to argue, not to defend myself online, not to confront Marcus. I went silent. Strategically silent. I pulled bank statements directly from the institution through formal identity verification. It took 2 in-person visits and 3 security confirmations, but eventually they granted me temporary viewing rights under joint account laws. That's when the pattern stopped being suspicious and became undeniable. Transfers, regular, twice a month, sometimes 3. Different amounts, but always structured. Never round numbers. 420, 735s, $1 to $100. They were going to a secondary account registered under an individual name, not a company, not a vendor, a person. I ran the name through a basic public records search. A woman, same city, luxury apartment building. The boutique purchase? Same zip code. I didn't cry. I didn't feel shock. I felt confirmation. While my debit card declined at the pharmacy, he was financing someone else's stability. The irony was surgical. He called me unstable. But he destabilized our home intentionally, and now the architecture made sense. If I was financially restricted, if I was labeled emotionally volatile, if I was socially framed as unstable, then when separation happened, he would appear as the rational provider, the one protecting the children, the one safeguarding assets. I wasn't unraveling. I was being repositioned. That realization removed something dangerous from me: doubt. Rebecca helped me build the file. We categorized everything: financial restriction patterns, password access removals, declined transactions for essentials, transfer history to third-party account, social media defamation, police call timing. Keep emotion out of it, she reminded me. Present behavior. That was the key. Not feelings, not interpretations, actions. I also requested a copy of the police visit documentation. There was no accusation filed, no negligence noted. The responding officer had written, "Mother, cooperative, children safe." Those 3 words mattered more than Marcus understood. Mother cooperative, children safe. The narrative he was constructing had cracks. And now I had timestamps. The boutique purchase happened 3 days before the electric shutoff notice. A transfer occurred the same afternoon my gas card declined. The police call was logged 8 minutes after my vehicle left the house location. 8 minutes. He hadn't panicked. He had waited. That detail hardened something inside me permanently. I stopped trying to salvage civility. Not outwardly. Outwardly, I was neutral. But internally, I accepted a truth I had resisted. This was not miscommunication. This was design. The week before mediation, Marcus sent one more email. Subject: stability plan. He attached a proposed custody schedule. Primary residence: with him. Visitation: structured for me. Reasons cited: Danielle has demonstrated emotional inconsistency and financial mismanagement. Financial mismanagement. I almost laughed. He was using the consequences of his own restrictions as proof against me. Rebecca read the document and shook her head. "He's overreaching," she said calmly. "Is that good?" "It means he believes the narrative." On mediation day, I dressed simply. Neutral colors, no dramatic makeup, no visible emotion. Marcus arrived 10 minutes early. He wore a navy suit, confident, composed. He greeted the mediator with a firm handshake. "I'm concerned about my children," he began. Concerned. That word again. He presented printouts of text messages where I had used exclamation points, emails where I had written late at night, the social media post from his brother. He referenced the police visit. He said the word unstable 3 times. I didn't interrupt. When it was my turn, I slid a folder across the table, organized, tab-labeled, chronological. I didn't speak emotionally. I spoke in sequence. On March 3rd, my debit card declined for a medical purchase. On March 4th, $1.842 was spent at. The mediator's posture shifted. Marcus interrupted once. That was business. Rebecca calmly slid the transfer records forward. There are no corporate tax identifiers attached to these transactions. Silence. I continued. On April 11th, I requested account access. Access was revoked that evening. On April 14th, A police report was filed 8 minutes after I left the marital home for under 10 minutes. The mediator looked directly at Marcus. Is that timeline accurate? Marcus hesitated for the first time since I'd known him. It's being mischaracterized. Mischaracterized, not denied. The air in the room changed, not dramatically, but perceptibly. The unstable narrative was colliding with documentation, and documentation doesn't flinch. By the end of mediation, primary custody was not assigned. Joint custody remained. Financial transparency was mandated. Temporary spousal asset review was ordered. And the mediator used a phrase that echoed in my mind long after. Both parties need stability. Both parties. Not me. Not Danielle is unstable. Both. When we walked out into the parking lot, Marcus didn't look at me. For the first time, his certainty had hairline fractures. But this wasn't victory yet. It was interruption, because the night the police knocked at 9:12 p.m. wasn't just about accusation. It was about testing how far he could push the system. And now, the system had seen both of us. But the final confrontation wasn't in mediation. It was in something smaller, quieter, and far more revealing. And it happened 2 days later. 2 days after mediation, Marcus texted me at 6:42 a.m. Can we talk? No accusation. No narrative framing. Just that. I stared at the message longer than necessary. This was new. Throughout the entire escalation, he had never asked to talk. He had declared, diagnosed, documented, but not asked. I responded neutrally. About what? The kids. Of course. Everything circled back to them. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop halfway between the condo and the house. Public space. Neutral ground. When I arrived, he was already seated. No suit this time. No posture of courtroom composure. Just Marcus. He looked tired. For a brief second, an old reflex tried to surface. Empathy. But empathy had been weaponized before. So I sat down carefully. What's going on? I asked. He folded his hands on the table. You blindsided me in there. In mediation? Yes. With documentation? You made it sound like I was hiding money. I didn't react. Were you? His jaw tightened. It wasn't like that. There it was. Not denial. Minimization. He leaned forward slightly. You're overcomplicating things. That account, I interrupted calmly, received consistent transfers while our utilities were flagged. He exhaled sharply. You're fixating again. The word sounded weaker this time. Less clinical. More defensive. I'm organizing facts, I replied evenly. The shift was subtle but critical. Before, I would have tried to defend my emotional state. Now, I described behavior. He changed direction. You're making this harder than it needs to be. For who? For everyone. There it was again. Vagueness, collective harm, diffuse blame. I let the silence stretch. Eventually, he said what he had really come to say. You don't need to pursue a full financial review. I felt the weight of that sentence, not as a request, as exposure. That's not up to me alone anymore, I said. His eyes flickered. That was the moment I realized something important. Mediation had done more than interrupt him. It had removed his control over the pace. The system was now watching, and he didn't like it. You're dragging outsiders into this, he said. You involved police. The words landed softly but firmly. He looked away. That was a misunderstanding. No, I said calmly. It was timing. He didn't respond. And in that silence, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not rage, not manipulation. Fear, very small, but present. Not fear of losing me. Fear of losing narrative control. He shifted again. This is affecting the kids. Then stop escalating. You left. I documented. The difference mattered. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he said something that confirmed everything. You could have just trusted me. There it was. The core. Trust in his framework meant access without accountability, silence without oversight, loyalty without transparency. I trusted you, I said quietly. And you restricted access. For the first time, he didn't have a rehearsed phrase ready. No unstable, no spiraling, no projection. Just quiet. He picked up his coffee but didn't drink it. I didn't think you'd go this far. This far. As if protecting myself was escalation, as if documentation was aggression, as if clarity was betrayal. I studied his face. For months, I had doubted my perception. Replayed conversations, questioned my tone, analyzed my reactions. Now, sitting across from him, I felt something new. Stillness. I wasn't angry. I wasn't trembling. I wasn't trying to convince him. I was observing him. And that's when I understood something critical. The police call, the social media post, the financial restrictions. They weren't just tactics. They were tests. Tests to see how much pressure I would absorb, how quickly I would doubt myself, how far he could push without resistance. And mediation had given him data. I didn't fold. I documented. I didn't explode. I structured. That shifted the dynamic. He finished his coffee. "We don't need to make this ugly," he said. "It already was," I replied, but my tone wasn't sharp. It was factual. When we stood up to leave, he hesitated. "For what it's worth," he added, "I never thought you were actually unstable." The sentence hung between us. Not an apology, not accountability, just clarification. He had never believed it. He had used it. That was the quiet test. Not whether I was unstable, but whether I would accept the label. I walked back to my car with steady hands. The sky was overcast, the air heavy but calm. And as I started the engine, I realized something else. The woman who stood barefoot at 9:12 p.m., answering the door for police officers, was not the same woman sitting in that coffee shop. That night had been the peak of confusion. This moment was the end of doubt. But the final piece of truth wasn't about him. It was about me, because rebuilding isn't just legal, it's internal. And the last chapter of this story wasn't about exposure. It was about reclamation. Rebuilding doesn't begin when the court date ends. It begins the moment you stop arguing with reality. After the coffee shop conversation, something fundamental shifted inside me. For months, I had been reacting to accusations, reacting to restrictions, reacting to narratives. Now I was no longer responding to him. I was responding to truth. And truth doesn't need volume. It needs consistency. The financial review process moved forward slowly but methodically. More records surfaced. The transfers continued longer than I initially realized. Even after the first overdue notice. Even after the first police call. Even after mediation had been scheduled. It wasn't a momentary lapse. It was sustained allocation. And the most painful realization wasn't the betrayal. It was the prioritization. He didn't just redirect money. He redirected stability. While I was explaining to our son that we're building something new in a condo with mismatched lamps, he was underwriting someone else's comfort. I allowed myself one night to grieve that fully. Not for him, but for the version of partnership I believed I had. I sat at the small kitchen table in the condo, laptop open, documents spread neatly across the surface. No chaos, no confusion, just data. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel small. I felt precise. The final custody arrangement remained joint. Not because of his narrative, not because of mine, but because documentation neutralized exaggeration. The police report stating, "Mother cooperative, children safe," mattered. The transfer logs mattered. The pattern mattered. Facts are stabilizing. Ironically, the word that had haunted me, unstable, no longer carried weight. Because instability is inconsistency. And I had been consistent. Consistently asking for transparency. Consistently documenting. Consistently protecting my children. It was never volatility. It was visibility. Marcus tried once more to soften the edges. An email. Subject. Moving forward. He suggested we avoid unnecessary hostility. He suggested letting the past stay in the past. He suggested co-parenting peacefully. There was no mention of the transfers, no acknowledgement of the police call, no apology for the narrative he constructed, just a gentle attempt to reset without accountability. And for the first time, I didn't feel compelled to correct him. I didn't need him to admit anything, because the system had already seen the truth. And more importantly, I had. The final piece of the hook, the part I couldn't tell you at 9:12 p.m., wasn't dramatic. The officers didn't arrest anyone. They didn't issue warnings. They simply observed. And that observation broke his test. Because the police report didn't confirm instability. It confirmed safety. And when mediation reviewed that report alongside financial documentation, the unstable narrative dissolved quietly. Not in flames, in paperwork. That's the part people don't expect. There is no cinematic explosion. There is no screaming confession. There is just steady exposure. And steady exposure is more powerful. The condo slowly transformed. The chipped coffee table was replaced. The broken toys were repaired or donated. The mattress frame arrived. The space stopped echoing. Not because it was larger, but because it was mine. The children adapted faster than I feared. Our son stopped asking if we were poor. Our daughter lined up her fork and spoon on a new dining table with the same precision. Stability returned, not as perfection, but as predictability. And predictability is peace. Marcus still attempts control in small ways. Emails worded carefully. Requests framed strategically. But something fundamental is different now. I don't internalize his language. When he says, "You're overreacting," I translate it. When he says, "You're escalating," I check the facts. When he says, "You're emotional," I ask, "About what?" Language only works when it's absorbed. I no longer absorb it. The woman who answered that door at 9:12 p.m. felt accused. The woman I am now feels informed. And there's a difference between being unstable and being destabilized. I was never unstable. I was being restricted. I was being reframed. I was being repositioned. But I was never broken. And that's the quiet ending most people don't see. He tried to prove I was unstable. But instability was the only thing he couldn't manufacture in me. Because once I stopped defending myself emotionally and started documenting strategically, the narrative flipped. Not because I screamed louder, but because I stayed steady. And steady wins.